The greatest, deepest, and seemingly most irreversible consequence of the dissolution of the Soviet Empire was this. Since communism doesn't exist anymore, anyone is now free to defend the same policies the communists advocated, impose the same social controls the communists enforced, attack and denigrate the same people and values the communists targeted, and worship the same idols the communists exalted, all without ever being called a communist. The communists, of course, always liked to operate in disguise, wearing 1,000 masks to remain unrecognizable. But now they no longer need to. It's their enemies who camouflage them, who conceal them out of fear. Fear of being labeled nostalgic for the Cold War, or as far-right extremists, since nowadays anything to the right of center-left is considered extremism. Instead of a communism that doesn't dare speak its name, we now have a communism that its opponents don't dare name. The fear of uttering the forbidden word is so intense among liberals and conservatives that any half-educated hack sitting in a university chair, proudly donning a Che Guevara t-shirt and a pocket-sized book of Chairman Mao's thoughts, can boast about being a communist on primetime television, knowing full well that everyone will dismiss it as mere rhetoric, a playful exaggeration by a good kid who, deep down, isn't really a communist at all. This is how, under the protection of a dense, well-orchestrated web of linguistic prohibitions and mental inhibitions, the communist movement managed to dominate almost the entire political scene in Latin America, to control all Western European nations through a group of unelected bureaucrats, to regain power in various post-communist countries, and even to put one of its most devoted servants in the presidency of the United States. All while those who saw it happening feared that if they pointed it out, they'd come across as outdated as an old-school conservative, as evil as a fascist torturer, or as crazy as the wildest conspiracy theorist. How could such a vast, rapid, and seemingly paradoxical transformation take place? How was it possible that, following the spectacular collapse of a bankrupt and criminal regime, the political current that supported it everywhere didn't weaken or disappear, but instead rose spectacularly to become the dominant global ideology, unassailable because it was unnameable? I only ask this question out of charity for others' stupidity, mental laziness, and moral cowardice. Those who, only now, are beginning to suspect something that was already obvious and evident back in the early 1990s. Obvious and evident, of course, to those who observe, study, investigate, and seek the truth amid the confusion. Not to those who feel content and self-assured because they watched the evening news or read the daily paper. Today, at 66 years old, with just 2 years left to complete half a century in journalism, I am thoroughly convinced that anyone whose main or sole source of information is the mainstream media, called great perhaps only because of the size of their debts or the scale of their government deals, is a hopeless fool, a despicable idiot whose opinion isn't worth the breath it takes to express it. Seeing the worldwide success of this faceless communism, the right question is not, how did this happen, but how could it not have happened? Imagine if, after World War II, once Hitler's regime was toppled, no one bothered to punish the regime's crimes or expose the horrors of the ideology that spawned them. Instead, everyone kept silent to avoid reopening old wounds and let high-ranking Nazi officials remain in their positions, enriched by state assets and free to travel the world as honest and welcomed investors. Doesn't anyone see that in 10 years, Nazism would have returned under another name? We could have defeated communism in 1991, said Vladimir Bukovsky. But to do that, we would have needed a new Nuremberg tribunal. No tribunal was ever held. Mutatis mutandis, what good was it to thwart the communist coup in Brazil in 1964, if, afterward, the new regime, instead of educating the public against communism, preferred to dress itself up in the pomp of ideological neutrality and pragmatism, only fighting communists selectively and in the shadows, as if ashamed in advance of the crimes this foolish choice would almost inevitably force it to commit? Worse still, what good did it do to block the communists' advance, if, in their place, an authoritarian regime just as centralized as theirs took over, swapping the red elite for a green olive elite, equally jealous of their prerogatives to the point of excluding the most popular conservative leaders from politics, filling the vacancies with the most mediocre and submissive characters, for whom the role of mere rubber stampers of decrees was an honorable privilege. How could it have been possible, here and elsewhere, that what happened did not happen?